The crystal chandeliers cast rivers of golden light across the grand ballroom overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Every chair was wrapped in ivory silk. White roses climbed marble pillars from floor to ceiling. A string quartet played softly while cameras from the country's biggest lifestyle magazines captured every perfect detail. This wasn't just another wedding. It was being called the wedding of the decade. Business leaders, celebrities, politicians, and international investors had flown in from around the world to witness billionaire Adrian Hayes marry Victoria Collins, the elegant daughter of one of the nation's oldest financial families. Together, they would become the newest power couple in high society. Everything had been carefully planned. Every flower, every speech, every photograph, every smile. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. At the front of the ceremony, Adrian stood beside the officiant in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. At 38, he had built one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country from a tiny rented office into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Newspapers praised his discipline. Television hosts admired his intelligence. Employees respected him because he remembered the name of every person who worked in his headquarters. There was only one thing people often said about Adrian. He had sacrificed everything for success. Interviews always ended with the same question. Do you regret never starting a family? His answer never changed. I've always believed that when the time was right, life would make room for it. Today, everyone assumed that moment had finally arrived. Victoria looked breathtaking as she waited behind the large wooden doors. Her custom-designed gown shimmered beneath the lights like fresh snow under the morning sun. Her bridesmaids adjusted the endless veil while photographers whispered excitedly, eager to capture the moment she walked down the aisle. She smiled at her reflection. Everything was exactly as she had imagined since childhood. Outside the ballroom, guests spoke quietly while waiters carried silver trays filled with sparkling champagne. Every conversation seemed to revolve around the same subject. The merger between the Hayes Group and the Collins family businesses will be enormous. This wedding changes everything. They'll dominate the market for decades. To most of the guests, love was only part of the story. Power was the rest. The music shifted. The officiant smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please rise." Every guest stood. The large wooden doors slowly opened. But it wasn't the bride who appeared first. A tiny little girl stepped into the ballroom, carrying a small white basket overflowing with rose petals. Her name was Lily. She was only 6 years old. Her soft brown curls bounced with every careful step she took. The flower crown resting on her head seemed almost too large for her tiny face, and the satin dress she wore had been altered 3 separate times to fit her perfectly. She had practiced this walk for weeks. Her grandmother had reminded her all morning, "Just smile, sweetheart. Sprinkle the flowers and keep walking." Lily nodded every time. She truly wanted to do everything right. She wasn't related to either the bride or the groom. Victoria's closest friend had offered Lily the role after another flower girl became sick just days before the ceremony. Everyone thought it was a sweet gesture toward a quiet little girl who had recently lost a mother. No one expected her to become the center of attention. The quartet continued playing. Tiny white petals floated through the air as Lily slowly walked down the aisle. Guests smiled warmly. Several lifted their phones to record the adorable moment. Adrian watched politely, barely noticing the child. Then Lily looked up. For one brief second, their eyes met. She stopped walking. The music continued. The guests assumed she had become nervous. One bridesmaid whispered from the back of the room, "Keep going, sweetheart." But Lily didn't move. Instead, she stared at Adrian with an expression that didn't belong on the face of a 6-year-old. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Adrian frowned almost imperceptibly. There was something strangely familiar about the little girl's eyes. He couldn't explain why. He had never seen her before. Had he? Lily took one tiny step closer, then another. The ballroom grew quieter. The violinists slowly lowered their bows as they realized something unexpected was happening. Victoria, still hidden behind the doors, whispered impatiently to her wedding planner. Why did the music stop? The planner peeked inside the ballroom. I don't know. Every guest was now watching the little girl. Lily smiled. Not the shy smile she'd worn all morning. This smile carried relief. As though she had finally found someone she had been searching for. She looked directly into Adrian's eyes. In a voice so soft that only the people nearest the altar heard it at first, she said, "Hi, Daddy." Silence. Absolute silence. The words drifted across the ballroom like a whisper that somehow reached every corner of the room. One champagne glass slipped from a guest's hand and shattered against the marble floor. Nobody reacted. Nobody breathed. The officiants stared at Adrian. The photographers forgot to press their cameras. Even the ocean waves outside seemed distant. Victoria stepped into the doorway just in time to hear the last word.
Daddy.
Her smile disappeared instantly. She looked from Adrian to the little girl, then back again. What did she just say? Adrian felt every eye in the room burning into him. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His heartbeat thundered inside his chest. This had to be some misunderstanding. It had to be. He had never had children. At least, he had never believed he did. Lily's small face lit up with innocent happiness. She clutched the basket tightly and walked the remaining few steps until she stood directly in front of him. So, you really are here, she whispered. Adrian looked down at her, completely frozen. Something inside him shifted. Not a memory. Not yet. Just a strange feeling he couldn't explain. Before anyone could speak, Lily reached beneath the collar of her dress and pulled out a tiny silver necklace that had been hidden against her chest. She carefully opened the small heart-shaped locket. Inside was an old photograph. Its edges were faded from years of being handled. Lily held it up for Adrian to see. The color drained from his face. In the picture, a much younger Adrian stood beside a smiling woman he hadn't seen in years. And cradled between them was a newborn baby. Se quisir, posso escribir a part 2 mantendo o mesmo ritmo cinematográfico e suca de 5.000 characters, terminando novamente com forte gancho. For several seconds, Adrian could only stare at the photograph. The noise of the ballroom vanished around him.
The guests.
The cameras. The shattered glass on the floor. Even Victoria's voice seemed impossibly far away. All he could see was the woman in the picture. Emily Carter. The name returned to him with the force of a memory he had spent years refusing to revisit. She had entered his life before the private jets, before the magazine covers, before his company had become a global empire. Back then, Adrian had been living in a one-bedroom apartment, surviving on coffee, ambition, and the belief that he was only one good opportunity away from changing his life. Emily had believed in him before anyone else did. She had brought dinner to his office when he forgot to eat. She had listened to his ideas when investors laughed at them. She had sat beside him on the floor of his tiny apartment and told him that success would mean nothing if he lost himself while chasing it. But the company began growing faster than either of them expected. Meetings became trips. Trips became months apart. Phone calls became shorter. Arguments became more frequent. And then one morning, Emily disappeared from his life. No goodbye. No explanation. Only silence. Adrian had tried to find her, but his schedule had already become controlled by assistants, lawyers, and executives who insisted he could not afford distractions. After several unanswered calls and returned letters, he convinced himself she had chosen to leave. Now, 7 years later, her face was staring back at him from a silver locket. And beside her was a child. His child. No, Adrian whispered. Lily's smile faded. She slowly lowered the necklace. Victoria stepped forward, her veil dragging behind her across the rose petals. This is ridiculous, she said sharply. Someone planned this. Her voice broke the silence, and the ballroom immediately filled with whispers. Adrian looked at Lily again. The shape of her eyes. The small dimple in her left cheek. The way she pressed her lips together when she was nervous. He had seen those expressions before. On Emily. And in the mirror. Victoria turned toward the wedding planner. Get the child out of here. Lily's face crumpled. Adrian reacted before he had time to think.
No.
The single word echoed through the room. Victoria stared at him. What did you say? I said no. Adrian stepped down from the altar and knelt in front of Lily. Up close, the resemblance was impossible to ignore. Where did you get that photograph? He asked gently. Lily looked toward the back of the ballroom. A woman in her early 60s was pushing through the guests. She wore a simple navy dress and looked painfully out of place among the designer gowns and expensive jewelry. Her eyes were already filled with tears. Lily, she called. Come here, sweetheart. The little girl ran into her arms. The woman held her tightly, then looked at Adrian. My name is Grace Carter, she said. Adrian stood slowly. He recognized the last name immediately. Emily's mother. Grace nodded. Victoria let out a cold laugh. Of course. This is extortion. Grace turned toward her. I don't want his money. Then why bring a child into my wedding and make an accusation like this? I didn't know Lily would recognize him. Victoria pointed toward the locket. She just happened to bring a photograph of my fiancé. She carries it every day. Grace's answer silenced several guests. She gently touched Lily's hair. That picture is one of the only things her mother left her. Adrian felt his chest tighten. He looked around the ballroom. Hundreds of people were watching. Some were recording. Others were already whispering to reporters. For the first time in his life, Adrian did not care about appearances. "Where is Emily?" he asked. Grace's expression changed. The pain in her face answered before her words did. "She died 2 years ago." Adrian stopped breathing. Lily buried her face against her grandmother. Grace continued, her voice trembling. "She was sick for a long time. She tried to stay strong for Lily, but the treatments stopped working." Adrian looked away. Memories flooded his mind. Emily laughing inside his old apartment. Emily asleep beside a stack of business plans. Emily telling him not to become the kind of man who measured everything in money. He had imagined meeting her again countless times. He had imagined anger, questions, maybe forgiveness. He had never imagined a grave. Grace reached inside her purse and removed a small wooden box. "I didn't come here to cause a scene," she said. "I was invited because Lily's teacher knows one of the bridesmaids. I had no idea who the groom was until we arrived." Victoria folded her arms. "And you expect us to believe that?" Grace ignored her. She opened the box. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Some were unopened. Some had stamps marked as undeliverable. Others carried the official logo of Adrian's company. Adrian picked one up. His name was written across the front in Emily's handwriting. The date in the corner was 7 years old. "What are these?" he asked. Grace's voice grew colder. "Every letter my daughter sent you." Adrian looked through them. There were birthday cards, medical records, ultrasound photographs, copies of emails. Each one had been returned, blocked, or ignored. "She tried calling too," Grace said. "At first, someone told her you were traveling. Then they said you were unavailable. Later, they told her you wanted no further contact." Adrian shook his head. "I never said that." "I know." Grace reached deeper into the box. "Emily didn't know. She spent years believing you had rejected your own daughter." Lily looked up. "Mom said Daddy was busy saving the world." Adrian closed his eyes. The innocence in her voice hurt more than any accusation could have. Victoria moved closer to him. "Adrian, this can be handled privately. We should continue the ceremony and let the lawyers investigate later." He turned to her. "Continue? There are hundreds of people here. There is a 6-year-old girl standing in front of me who may be my daughter." Victoria lowered her voice. "And there is a merger, depending on this wedding." Adrian stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Before he could respond, Grace removed one final envelope from the box. Unlike the others, it had never been mailed. The paper was yellowed, and Adrian's name was written across the front. Grace held it out to him. "Emily wrote this a few weeks before she died." Adrian took it with trembling hands. "Why didn't you send it?" "Because she made me promise I would only give it to you if Lily ever found you." The ballroom was silent again. Adrian broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. At the top of the page, Emily had written, "Adrian, if you are reading this, then our daughter has finally met her father." He swallowed hard and continued reading. Then his expression changed. Grace watched him carefully. "What does it say?" Victoria demanded. Adrian lifted his eyes from the letter. His face had gone pale. Emily had not only explained why she disappeared. She had named the person who made sure Adrian never learned the truth. Adrian stared at the final lines of Emily's letter, unable to believe the name written before him. Marcus Vale, his former chief operating officer. The man who had helped build the Hayes Group from a struggling startup into a global empire. The man Adrian had trusted with his schedule, his correspondence, and nearly every important decision during the most chaotic years of his life. Marcus had not simply known about Emily. He had made her disappear. The letter trembled in Adrian's hands. Emily explained that she had visited his office 3 times after discovering she was pregnant. On the final visit, Marcus had met her in the lobby and taken her into a private room. He told her Adrian wanted no contact. He claimed Adrian believed a child would destroy his career before it had even begun. Then Marcus offered her money to leave the city and remain silent. Emily refused. She continued writing, calling, and sending photographs. But every message passed through Marcus's control. None of them reached Adrian. At the bottom of the letter, Emily had written one final warning. "Marcus said your investors needed a man with no weaknesses. He believed Lily and I were obstacles standing between you and success." Adrian lowered the page. Across the ballroom, hundreds of guests waited for him to speak. Victoria stepped closer. Well, she demanded. Who does she accuse? Adrian looked toward the tables near the front of the room. Marcus Vale was sitting among the company's board members. His face was motionless, but one hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Adrian's voice was calm. Marcus. A wave of shock moved through the ballroom. Cameras turned immediately. Marcus slowly stood. This is absurd, he said. You're trusting a dead woman's letter over someone who has served you for 15 years? Adrian walked down the aisle toward him. Did Emily come to my office? Marcus glanced at the guests. This is not the place for this conversation. Answer me. Marcus forced a smile. Many people came to your office. You were becoming wealthy. Everyone wanted something. She was pregnant. I had no way of knowing the child was yours. You told her I wanted nothing to do with her. Marcus's expression hardened. I protected you. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Adrian stared at him. Protected me from my daughter? Marcus looked around, realizing every phone and camera was now pointed at him. You were days away from securing the investment that saved the company, he said. The board was already worried that your personal life was unstable. If the pregnancy became public, the deal could have collapsed. So you lied to her. I made a business decision. Grace covered Lily's ears. Adrian stepped closer. You stole 7 years from me. Marcus lowered his voice. I gave you everything you have. No, Adrian replied. You decided what I was allowed to know. One of Adrian's attorneys approached with a tablet. We've already contacted the company's records department, she said. There are archived visitor logs showing Emily Carter entered headquarters 3 times. On each occasion, she was signed in under Mr. Vale's authorization. Marcus's confidence disappeared. The attorney continued. We also found deleted email records recovered from an old server. At least 23 messages were redirected from Mr. Hayes's personal inbox. Adrian looked at Marcus with disgust. You read them. Marcus said nothing. You saw the photographs. Silence. You knew Lily existed. Marcus finally snapped. Yes. His voice echoed against the marble walls. I knew. And I knew you would throw everything away the moment you saw that child. You were emotional, inexperienced, and obsessed with proving you were different from every other executive. I did what was necessary. Lily began crying softly. Adrian's anger vanished for a moment when he heard her. He turned away from Marcus and walked back toward her. Victoria intercepted him. This has gone far enough, she whispered. Security can remove Marcus. The lawyers can deal with the rest. But we still have guests waiting. Adrian looked at her wedding dress. Then at the altar. You still want to continue? We have contracts, investors, and families depending on us. My daughter's mother died believing I abandoned them. And that is tragic, Victoria said. But it does not have to destroy our future. Lily looked up at her. Victoria noticed. Her frustration broke through the perfect expression she had maintained all day. I am not becoming responsible for a child who appeared in the middle of my wedding. The guests fell silent again. Adrian's face changed. Victoria immediately tried to correct herself. That is not what I meant. It sounded clear. She belongs with her grandmother. We can provide money, education, whatever they need. But she cannot suddenly become part of our life. Grace pulled Lily closer. Adrian removed the wedding ring he had been wearing in preparation for the ceremony. Victoria stared at it. What are you doing? He placed it in her hand. I almost married someone who sees my daughter as a problem to be managed. Adrian, think carefully. For 7 years, other people made decisions for me because they believed power mattered more than family. He looked at Marcus. That ends today. Then Adrian walked to Lily and slowly knelt in front of her. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Are you really my daddy? She asked. Adrian's voice broke. I believe I am. Why didn't you come? The question struck him harder than Marcus's betrayal. He reached for her hand but stopped, allowing her to decide whether she wanted to touch him. I didn't know about you, he said. But I should have searched harder for your mother. I should never have accepted that she disappeared without an explanation. Lily studied his face. Then she placed her small hand in his. I waited for you. Adrian lowered his head. I'm sorry. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. The billionaire who had remained calm through market crashes, lawsuits, and public scandals began to cry in front of everyone. After a moment, he stood with Lily in his arms and faced the guests. There will be no wedding today. Victoria's face turned pale. Adrian continued. But before anyone leaves, there is something I need every person in this room to witness. He looked at his attorney. Prepare a public statement. Freeze Marcus's access to every company account. Contact the authorities and begin a full investigation. Then he looked at Grace. And arrange a paternity test immediately. Grace nodded. Adrian held Lily closer. For the first time that day, the little girl smiled. But near the ballroom entrance, a security officer approached Adrian's attorney and whispered something urgent. Her expression changed. What is it? Adrian asked. She turned the tablet toward him. There is another file connected to Emily's messages. Adrian looked at the screen. It was a legal document signed 6 years earlier. A document stating that someone had accepted money in exchange for permanently surrendering Lily's connection to the Hayes family. At the bottom was Grace Carter's signature. The document left Adrian speechless. He slowly lifted his eyes toward Grace. Lily looked from her grandmother to Adrian, unable to understand why everyone had fallen silent again. Grace closed her eyes. "I knew this would happen," she whispered. Adrian held up the document. "Why is your signature here?" Tears rolled down Grace's face before she answered. "Because I believed I had no other choice." The ballroom remained silent. Grace took a shaky breath. 6 years ago, Emily's treatments had exhausted every penny we had. The hospital bills kept growing. Lily was only a baby. Marcus came to my house with 2 lawyers. She paused, struggling to continue. He said you had refused to acknowledge Lily, and that if we kept fighting, we'd lose everything. Adrian clenched his jaw. Grace continued. He offered enough money to pay for Emily's treatment and promised a trust fund for Lily. In return, I had to sign papers saying we would never contact you again. Did Emily know? Grace immediately shook her head.
No.
Her voice cracked. She would have rather died than sign those papers. That's why I did it without telling her. She lowered her head in shame. I thought I was saving my daughter. Adrian looked back at the document. The signature was real, but so was the manipulation. Marcus hadn't bought Grace's silence. He had exploited a desperate mother trying to save her dying daughter. Adrian turned toward Marcus, who now stood surrounded by security officers. You didn't just steal 7 years from me, Adrian said quietly. You preyed on people who had nothing left. Marcus said nothing. For the first time in years, there was no confidence in his eyes. Only defeat. Minutes later, police officers entered the estate. After hearing statements from Adrian, Grace, and the company's legal team, they informed Marcus that he would be questioned regarding fraud, obstruction of communications, falsification of corporate records, and possible financial crimes connected to the settlement. As he was escorted away, Marcus looked back at Adrian. I built your empire. Adrian answered without hesitation. No. He looked down at Lily. I almost lost my family because of yours. Marcus lowered his head as the doors closed behind him. The ballroom remained filled with guests, but the atmosphere had completely changed. No one cared about the flowers anymore. No one cared about the expensive decorations. The wedding was over. Victoria slowly approached Adrian one final time. I suppose this is goodbye. Adrian nodded. I wish things had been different. So do I, she replied. She looked briefly at Lily. I hope you find what you've been looking for. Without another word, Victoria removed her engagement ring, placed it beside Adrian's unopened wedding vows, and quietly walked out of the ballroom. No one followed her. Hours later, after nearly every guest had left, Adrian sat on the steps overlooking the ocean with Lily beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. The little girl finally broke the silence. Mom used to say the ocean makes sad people feel better. Adrian smiled through tired eyes. She was right. Lily leaned against his shoulder. Can I ask you something? Anything. Will you disappear again? The question pierced his heart. He turned toward her.
No.
He gently brushed a loose curl away from her face. I've already missed too much. 3 months later, DNA results confirmed what Adrian had already known in his heart. Lily was his daughter. He officially became her legal guardian while Grace remained an important part of her life. Instead of moving Grace aside, Adrian invited her to live nearby, thanking her for raising Lily with love despite impossible circumstances. The Hayes Foundation was soon transformed. A new division, created in Emily Carter's memory, began providing legal assistance, financial aid, and medical support for single parents facing crises similar to hers. Thousands of families would eventually receive help because of one woman Adrian had failed to protect. Marcus's actions triggered a wider investigation. Authorities uncovered years of unethical corporate practices hidden beneath his leadership. Several executives resigned. Investors praised Adrian's decision to expose the truth instead of protecting the company's image. For the first time, headlines celebrated him not as a billionaire, but as a father. 1 year later, the same oceanfront estate opened its doors again. There were no luxury centerpieces, no television cameras, no political guests, only family, close friends, laughter, and colorful balloons. A large banner read, Happy 7th birthday, Lily. She ran across the garden with a huge smile before throwing herself into Adrian's arms. Daddy. He lifted her high into the air. What is it, princess? She wrapped her arms around his neck. This is my favorite day ever. Adrian laughed. It might be mine too. As the birthday cake was placed on the table, Grace quietly stood beside a framed photograph of Emily. She smiled through her tears. You found him after all. The candles were lit. Everyone gathered around. Before making her wish, Lily looked at Adrian. Can we always celebrate together? He took her hand. Every birthday. Every Christmas? Every Christmas. Every day. Adrian smiled. Every single day. Lily closed her eyes, made her wish, and blew out the candles. The applause that followed was louder than anything heard at the wedding 1 year earlier. Because this time, no one was celebrating the beginning of a marriage. They were celebrating the reunion of a family that love had never truly abandoned. Sometimes the greatest fortunes are not measured by companies, houses, or bank accounts. Sometimes they are measured by the second chance to hear a child look into your eyes and call you dad.